Good afternoon, everybody. I presume you've all had food, which is good, so no falling asleep in my talk, please, because I know how it is after we've eaten. It's a beautiful day here in Sofia. Last time I was here 2 years ago, we had a heat wave. I don't know if you all remember that. It was horrible. I was doing a workshop in the back room and I was melting, but yes, this year the weather's a bit better. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me back at J Prime in Sofia. I do love your city. I got to have a look around last time I was here, which was pretty cool. Today we're talking about cybercriminals and why it's important. Yay! So I'm going to scare you all a little bit, talk about what's been going on in the world. I am very much focused on open source criminality, essentially. So not all the other criminals in the world, but generally people who target open source, so all the lovely stuff we like to use. A little bit of background about me. So I used to work at IBM, and actually the last time I was here was one of my last talks I ever did at IBM. I can't remember if you had these boards last time. I don't like these boards because I have a thing where I like to point with my feet when the projector's not there. So yeah, a bit weird, but yeah, experience. So I worked on mainframes. That was weird coming out of university to be on a green screen like 10 years ago. Worked on WebSphere, OpenLiberty, OpenJ9, and now I'm at Sonatype. So hands up, how many people have heard of Sonatype before? Not SonarCube, not SonarSource. No, not you. A few of you, okay, good. So I guarantee you use our stuff all the time because you're all Java developers. Who's heard of Maven Central? Hands up. A few more of you, come on, more of you have heard of Maven Central than that. Okay, so we run Maven Central for you all, okay? We've been doing it for a very, very long time. It started out underneath my boss's desk. He was one of the creators of Maven, and obviously it got bigger and bigger. Runs on AWS now, so you can imagine our cloud bill's not the cheapest in the world, but we make no money from this whatsoever. These are the things we do make money from, okay? So you might be familiar with Nexus Repository. It was the first artifact repository in the world, and lots of other stuff. But I'm not here to talk about Sonatype stuff today. I am here to talk about criminals and how they take advantage of our kind nature. So first of all, I'm going to talk about what the criminals have been up to. I'm going to talk about the cost of cybercrime, how AI, the revolution, is changing things for us all, how the bad guys have evolved, how Maven Central keeps us all safe, just a bit about why open source is amazing, why we use it, some legislation you should be all aware of, especially being in the EU, how you can make some simple changes to improve your security posture. I'll talk a bit about what a static analysis tool is, an SCA tool, and what SBOMs are. And these are all tools and all things that can help us be more secure. So, the modern face of cybercrime, right? The perception is generally it's difficult tasks, detailed plots, lots of high technology, elaborate schemes. But in reality, it's none of those things, right? It's very simplistic. That people are trying, the bad people are trying very simple ways to attack us, okay? To the point, there is something called malware as a service. Who's heard of malware as a service? Yes, it is a thing. And it does have support. So you can go and get malware as a service and get lifetime support. How about that? Don't do it, please, everybody. Please do not go and get malware as a service. But yes, they have active support channels on Discord, etc. So let's have a think. What have the criminals been doing in the open source space? Well, I'm not going to go back through the whole of history because it's a lot, okay? I'm going to start from 2017, and I'm only going to give you a few snippets of what's been happening because it's a lot, okay? I will give you a link after this. There is a great website that Sonatype have which talks about the history of open source cybercrime attacks, so you can go through that and have a look. But there's a common pattern in a lot of this, and hopefully some of you can spot it. So first of all, we go back to 2017. At the start, there was a typo squatting attack on NPM. 39 packages were harvested, undetected for over 2 weeks, and they collected everyone's credentials that published to the NPM repository itself. And of course, NPM had to react to that. So about a month later, they realized about 14% of everything on the NPM repo was exposed, right? 79,000 packages. And as a result, they had to reset everyone's passwords and auth tokens, right? Then we go to Python, right? Typo squatting. I'll explain what typo squatting is a little bit later. But again, more malicious packages, 10 were found. Basically, with misspelled names. This is done for a very particular reason, because not all of us, when we type, get everything perfect, right? And it was there to trick users. So the evidence of these fake packages were incorporated into lots of people's software, okay? And this is just the highlights of 2017. So 2018, this guy called David Gibson, he basically writes a fictional tale on his blog talking about how he could easily steal everyone's credit card numbers and passwords from their site. Go check it out. It's a really, really good blog. Well, don't follow what he says to do, but he's basically explaining how easy this stuff is to do, right? Another example, GitHub. We all know GitHub. Basically, someone deleted their GitHub account, and all of a sudden, an unknown user resurrected it, right? And that kind of put into question like some of the authentication and how some of these things are done. I know GitHub has changed stuff recently, so not enable that in future, but again, very, very easy to get into someone's repository. And if you think about open source, all of this stuff is stored on GitHub, right? Then NPM, credentials were intentionally compromised. A malicious version of a package from a core contributor basically put something in to change the changelog. This package was then installed 28,000 times within 35 hours. And of course, what did they do? They started mining crypto, which is what people like to do, right? Fast forward to 2018, we now have a Linux distro which is hacked on GitHub. Unknown individuals gained access to this organization, modified the content of its repositories, so all of that code was now considered compromised, okay? Going forward, we got compromised JavaScript packages, stealing NPM credentials, the homebrew repository was compromised in the same year, so it's really quite scary how many places these people are attacking us. They're not just doing it in one place, they're doing it in lots of places. Going forward to 2019, I know Josh Long was talking about how bad Ruby is, so try not to use Ruby anyway, but again, more backdoors were put in, a malicious version of a popular Bootstrap package. It was also downloaded 28 million times to date. That's crazy, right? 28 million times. And as Java developers, we're just as bad, and I'll explain why we're just as bad later. Luckily, Maven Central keeps us quite safe. Moving on, we've got more cryptocurrency attacks on NPM via malicious code injection, compromised versions of the REST client maintainer stole crypto miners. So you can see a pattern here, right? They're trying to get in, they're trying to use our hardware, which is very costly, to mine crypto. Microsoft also then, if we move into 2020, Microsoft spots malicious JavaScript packages. Then we go to hundreds of malware gems found on Ruby gems, downloaded 2,100 times. Octopus Scanner was 26 open source packages were found to be compromised. And this basically malware was designed to emulate a backdoor to the NetBeans project through the NetBeans IDE. How many people use NetBeans in here? Ah, okay. You're right then. You might be familiar with SolarWinds. This was quite a crazy story. Threat actors gained access to the SolarWinds dev infrastructure. They injected a lot of malicious code. 18,000 customers automatically pulled down that code with Trojans in it, planting backdoors into their systems. This was one of the first times the US government said, no, we've had enough now. And SolarWinds got taken. They got taken to court and they had to pay a lot of money. People went to prison because of this, okay? So things are slowly starting to change. You might be familiar with Microsoft's Winget. That got flooded with duplicates and malformed apps. There's also got a ransomware group discovered and exploit a zero-day vulnerability in a remote monitoring and management platform used by dozens of managed security providers. So same theme here, cryptocurrency heist from a GitHub commit. Again, crypto, 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 they're all trying to mine crypto, right? Fast forward to 2022. A crypto app faces a £5 million ransom demand for Log4j. Who's familiar with the Log4j vulnerability? Yay, there we go. Finally some Java. PyPy was flooded again with 1,200 more dependency confusion packages. Again, you can see the theme over and over again. People are trying to get to the open source code we download on a regular basis, right? So we're nearly at the end of all the bad things people have been trying to hack us with. HTTPS package attempts to sneak through a GTA 5 mod. They're now trying to get into gamers, right? They know a lot of software developers, a lot of software engineers, we like to play games. So now they're targeting us in different ways. They're getting clever. They're adding stuff through GTA 5 mods. I think there was another thing, I can't remember what it was. There was another game where they intentionally added more vulnerabilities and malware into that. Again, you can see the theme, right? Can you see a modern, common thing that's not happened here? Come on, hands up. Anyone see that something that's not happening so much? Java, right? We have one notice of Java in this whole thing. And the majority of malware is in Python, it's in Ruby, it's in Node, etc. Right? So Java is quite safe, and I'll explain a little bit why later. It's because of a lot of decisions that were made by Sonatype at the beginning, and the Maven community and the Apache community to keep us all safe. So what is the cost of cybercrime? I like to use these slides quite often because it's a good way of scaring everyone a little bit into paying attention to this stuff. So if we go back to 2016, cybercrime surpassed the drug trade, okay? That was 450 billion US dollars a year. That's 14,000 US dollars a second. That is equivalent to 50 of the world's biggest nuclear aircraft carriers, right? I think the United States has 3 of these. I think there's only about 50 aircraft carriers or 40 aircraft carriers in the whole world. But yet in 2016, cybercrime was making enough to buy 50 of these. Now it's a good job they're not all together, right? Because we'd be in a lot of trouble. I've got data from 2022. Do you reckon this has got worse? Yeah, of course it has. We are now at 6 trillion US dollars a year. That's 200,000 US dollars a second. That is equivalent to 620 of the world's biggest nuclear aircraft carriers, right? These things are expensive, and cybercriminals are making enough to buy 620 of them. And if cybercrime was the GDP of a country, it would be the 3rd largest country in the whole world. Crazy, right? Isn't that just amazing how much money they're earning? Now, in 2024, I've seen lots of documentation and lots of things on the internet that now suggest this is at 9 trillion, right? This is a lot of money these people are making. Now, what can you buy with 9 trillion US dollars, you may ask? Well, you can buy 162 million teachers' salaries. You can do 36,000 celebrity divorce settlements. That's a surprisingly low number, right? Like 36,000? I don't know. They must be making a lot of money. It's a lot of Toyota Priuses, if you like Toyota Priuses. But most importantly, it's 11.9 trillion chocolate bars. I mean, they're stealing all our chocolate, right? We've got to be careful. And to be honest, if this guy was around today, do you think he would be in the drug trade? Cybercriminals very, very rarely get caught, okay? But drug dealers, they usually get shot, they usually get put in prison. But he wouldn't have drugs and money around him nowadays. He'd have loads of hackers, because there's so much more money to be made, right? And of course, now we're in the new era of artificial intelligence, which makes all of this so much harder. Now, I'm going to play some videos in a bit. I've never actually played a video on stage, basically because it always never works. But I'm going to try and do it today and show you how scary some of these things are. But this is some information that IBM gathered from X-Force. And this is in relation to the Log4j vulnerability that we're all aware of. They found in 2006, you had on average 45 days before when a vulnerability was announced to when they started hacking you. What we found with Log4j is that we had less than a day. That vulnerability got announced, and we had less than a day before everybody started getting hacked, okay? And the world has changed. It's 25 years ago, we weren't using loads of open source code. We were writing everything ourselves, right? But now, I have seen code for insulin pumps with open source libraries in them. I've seen code for aircraft, self-driving cars, trains, all of this stuff, all of the software that runs a lot of this infrastructure is all using open source libraries, okay? And this is just us at Sonatype, right? To date, we have found over 350,000 malicious packages, right? It's not a vulnerability that's in we've just found that many packages with our stuff. Now, luckily, being in the Java space, as you can see here, 94.6 of those were NPM and Python, right? So we're a little bit safer there because we don't have to worry about that. Sonatype, we've been using AI way before it was cool. We've been using it about 5-6 years. So essentially, we have a product called Firewall. And basically what happens is when you go in, it uses AI, scans it. We have a security research team that double checks everything because AI cannot be trusted. You know, we've all seen Terminator, right? So basically, they go and retrain the AI every time because the bad people are getting very, very clever about this stuff. Now, how is AI making this a lot more difficult? Well, first of all, people are trying to use AI to not target singular people. I mean, they are targeting singular companies, but a lot of the time, they're trying to hit as many people, as many repositories as they can until that one person they find doesn't have the right credentials, is insecure, and then they use that and they get in through that means, okay? They don't target very individual people most of the time. They target all of us, and then all it takes is just one of us to screw up, and then they're in, okay? Now, AI is not a new thing. AI has been around a long time. Alan Turing, 1950, came up with the Turing test, essentially a test to see if AI is smarter than humans, right? Logic theorists, one of the first ever chatbots in the world. This is one of the first actual humanoid robots in the world. IBM Deep Blue, they created AI to beat some of the best chess players in the world. The Roomba, I've got a husky and a golden retriever. This thing saved my life. I'm telling you. But this was the first bit of home technology that has AI inside of it, right? So none of this stuff is new. Everyone's like, oh, AI is new craze. It's not. It just means my grandma can use AI now. That is the only difference, right? Eugene Goodsman, again, another AI system. This was one of the first ones to ever beat the Turing test, or they say beat the Turing test. ChatGPT. Now, this is what has made AI a buzzword popular nowadays, right? We all know what ChatGPT is. It's the fastest growing consumer application in history. I really need to change Google Bard because it's not Bard anymore, isn't it? What's the new Google one called? Gemini. There we go. But it has the tendency to confidently provide inaccurate information. How many times have you been caught out where you've asked ChatGPT to say something, answer a question, and you're like, oh, it really knows what it's saying. And then you go and say it to someone else, they're like, dude, that is completely wrong. I'm like, oh, no, I definitely didn't use AI for that. But again, a lot of this stuff requires training, right? So like I said, using AI to fight bad AI, this stuff requires training. So in the early days of ChatGPT, they outsourced all that training to Kenyan workers for like $2 an hour. But you can imagine the vile things humans put into ChatGPT, right? Especially in the early days, they were trying to play around with it. And for example, I have managed to get ChatGPT to create malware. I don't know if it still does that, but you used to be able to go, hey, ChatGPT, can you create me an example of malware for just research purposes? There you go. It's like, wow, okay. But yeah, so the world's changing, okay? Now this, in my opinion, this new image and video generation, this is what's going to screw us all over. This is the scary part, okay? So hopefully this video plays. We will find out in a moment. So I just press, yes. Look how real this is. I don't know if you've seen this. This is a very common thing that came out.
I am not Morgan Freeman. And what you see is, well, temporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality? Is it the ability to capture, process, and make sense of the information our senses receive? If you can see, hear, taste, or smell something, does that make it real? Or is it simply the ability to feel? I would like to welcome you to the era of synthetic reality. Now, what do you see?
Sounds like Morgan Freeman, but it's going to get to the point where bad people are going to get into our Zoom calls. They're going to be pretending to be our teammates, and they are going to be asking for credentials and stuff. And how do you even verify that when we all work from home, right? How is that even possible? You might have to wait till you go into the office the next day to talk to someone, open another channel, but if someone gets into, say, a colleague's laptop, they can pretty much, if they can replicate them on Zoom calls and things like that, it can get to the point where they can ask us for anything and we'll just believe them. We'll just give them credentials, right? If, say, your colleague turned around to you and said, look, one of the production systems is down, I need the keys to get in to basically, to reboot it, restart it, you're just going to give it to them if you're on a Zoom call and they look like your colleague. So this stuff's getting pretty scary. There's another video here of Obama, which I thought was amazing as well. Not quite as good as the Morgan Freeman one, but still like quite a scary video. So yeah, just watch.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele.
That's the actor. This is live.
This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you. And stay woke, bitches.
I mean, they did that live. There was no processing. They did the processing, but they did it all instantly, right? This stuff is getting scary. I mean, with Obama, I could tell there were certain things he did, but it was pretty close. So should we be worried as developers? Well, should we be worried about AI in general? Well, yes and no. It's going to be a long time till we have robots like this replacing us doing what we do. I quite like this. So to replace programmers with AI, project managers need to accurately describe what they want. So we're safe for the time being, right? But unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know which one, we'll probably all be dead by then, so don't worry too much about this. But we will be the last people on this planet still working, as long as we don't blow each other up for them. Because our jobs is essentially to automate the world, right? Is to automate every manual task so nobody has to do it, right? And we now have the ability to even build stuff. So if you've looked at the Boston Dynamics robots, they can climb up walls, they can hammer stuff in. It now just becomes a question of cost, right? So as soon as the cost goes slowly down, we automate things. But unfortunately, we're going to be the last ones still here because we're going to be building all these things that are automating everything, right? But yeah, so back to cybersecurity and the bad guys. They have evolved, okay? They're not just people there trying to make money a lot of the time nowadays. They are nation states. They are backed by national organizations, and they're there to take down our power infrastructure. They're there to take down our drug manufacturing facilities, even our grocery deliveries, right? And they're not doing it instantly. They will get into our systems, they will wait for the opportune moment to cause the most amount of problems, and that is when they will act, right? So it's not a case that you're like, oh, I haven't been hacked at the moment, I'm fine. No, they may be in your systems, they may just not have taken the opportunity to do anything yet because they're waiting for a time to cause you the most amount of pain, right? But Maven Central, back to why Java's the best, right? We're at J Prime. So Maven Central has had some things in it to basically make us a lot more secure. The biggest thing that has protected us in the Java community, and it may be a headache for a lot of people that upload to Maven Central, trust me, it's a headache for Sonatype as well, but you must own the domain, okay? So if I'm putting something up on Maven Central, I have to own the URL or the domain of org.apache.log4j or something like that, right? This little fundamental thing has protected Java since the start of Maven Central, okay? So basically, it just helps reduce malware ending up in this repository. Now, there has been, in the history of Maven Central, it's been going 15 years, something like that. I think Sonotype's been looking after it for 12 years. There's only been one bit of malware that's got into Maven Central. So just to clarify, the difference between vulnerabilities and malware is made for malicious purposes. Someone has made that to do bad things. A vulnerability is generally a coding mistake, like we saw with Log4j. The Log4j people didn't put that in there to screw us all over. They put that in there, well, it was just a coding mistake, right? So we have different things here. So I talked about typo squatting, dependency confusion. So the top one, for example, is where someone will put a really long version number, like 999.999, and anyone. You shouldn't be doing this. You should try not to always pull down the latest, because it's basically, just because it doesn't have vulnerabilities or malware, it just means it hasn't been tested thoroughly enough. But basically, you'll go and pull latest, and you're going to get that version, right? Which could be bad. The second one is, you can see the slight spelling mistake there. That's called typo squatting, log.j4. I do it all the time. I mean, I used to be a container engineer. The amount of times I used to write Dicker rather than Docker was unbelievable, right? It's just a mistake you do, but generally most of the time you hit enter and it's like, okay, well, it doesn't work. Okay, I wrote Dick instead of Doc, but still. But see, this one is allowed in Maven Central because someone can go and create a domain with org.apache, and that would be allowed, right? Now, generally, we wouldn't allow that in Maven Central. We would know that that's there for malicious purposes. We would verify the domain and the people and try and do that. But for us, that's a headache for us. It's a very small team that looks after Maven Central, so they have to go through this all the time. But again, Python, Node, the other repositories, they do not have this domain protection. They are trying to put lots of stuff in all the time to basically stop malware getting up there, but it does, and it does on a massively regular basis. Every day, Sonotype makes a takedown request to the Python and the Node repositories. Every day, we make a takedown request because we found something bad. Now, they have to verify that takedown request. They can't just instantly pull something down. So in the meantime, while they're figuring that out, you could have downloaded some malware. But stuff is hard, okay? Does any new package I download contain vulnerabilities? How do I even figure that out? Do you stop the code being published? Does the new package contain malware? So again, all this stuff is not easy, and it's something we didn't really have to think about for a long time. Now we use AI again, using good AI to stop the bad AI. Everything that goes into Maven Central is scanned by our AI system. So only malware is rejected. And I get asked a lot, why don't we just remove the vulnerable version of Log4j? I'll explain a little bit why later, and you'll see how many people's builds that would crash. But again, we only remove malware because that is there for malicious intent, right? And with Java, you generally have to hit the line of code to get that vulnerability into your system. If you're not using that part, you're generally okay. And Maven Central is evolving as well. I mean, if you've been on Maven Central in the last year, we changed the look and feel of it a little bit, right? And I think a load of people came to me, and a lot of other people at Sonotype were like, oh, Sonotype's taken over Maven Central. No, we just got fed of it looking like it was built in 1992. That's why we changed it, okay? Because it hadn't changed in years. But what we're trying to do is essentially give you more insight before you even download an open source library as to what vulnerabilities it has in it, okay? So going back to the reason why we don't take vulnerable versions of stuff down. This was Log4j down. I mean, we can see everything you download from Maven Central. We can see what countries download it. And this is Log4j, the vulnerable version, right? So this was a few months after it was announced. We were at 51 million downloads of Java's worst vulnerability in history. Do you reckon that's got worse again? 354 million downloads, people. In the last week, 33% of Log4j downloads are the most vulnerable Java version in history. It's like, oh, we've really got to get better at doing this. But we're not, okay? I mean, open source is amazing. That's the reason we use it. We love open source code. I mean, like I said, 25 years ago, pretty much everything we wrote ourselves, okay? Now, we did some research. 90% of modern applications that are shipped, we didn't write that code. We took that from somewhere in the internet, right? And we just trust that that open source library, that code is good. But that's generally not the case in a lot of times. And this isn't slowing down. So this is annual download volumes of all the different open source libraries. Java's still going up, JavaScript's gone up quite a lot. So as you can see, we're consuming more open source than ever, which is great. It allows us to innovate. We don't have to write that 90% of boring code we did before. But it means we need to pay attention to that. We need to spend a bit of the time we've saved not writing that 90% of code and actually spend some time paying attention to what's in the free stuff we're downloading, right? So this is an average Java project. Again, we didn't have to worry about this 25 years ago, but it has 150 dependencies. Those have 10 releases per year. Now, all of a sudden, every Java project we have to worry about 1,500 dependency updates to consider a year. That's crazy, right? But again, we're in the world of automation. We can automate this. I mean, I love this. I mean, you've probably all seen it before, but this is pretty much it, right? We're all relying on that one random person in Nebraska keeping that open source library going, free of vulnerabilities, and we're just trusting them, okay? And it gets worse. I mean, this is, for example, this might be an older version of Spring Boot. How many people use Spring in here? Spring Boot? Few of you. So as you can see, I go and download Spring Boot. That goes down, those pulls down more dependencies. That pulls down more dependencies and more dependencies and more dependencies. How do you know the health of all those dependencies you're pulling down? You probably aren't checking, right? So we can't just rely because it's coming from a big company that it's going to be safe. To the point we actually published some stuff about Spring on Maven Central, and they told us off because they weren't happy. But our job is not to make people happy. Our job is to make people aware that there's vulnerabilities and stuff, and we're going to tell you there's vulnerabilities and stuff. Doesn't matter who the company is. But there is lots of different open source foundations here to the rescue, right? OpenSSF is creating something called project scoring. This will basically look at open source projects and give you a score. It will tell you how healthy they are, how quickly they're doing updates to fix vulnerabilities and things like that, right? So there is no excuse to not pay attention to this stuff. This is completely free and open source, right? Now, governments of the world are changing. They've had enough of this. For example, the manufacturing industry, right? I had a well-known German car brand vehicle. It was brand new. I got it through work. And one of the faults was if I turned the wheel too quickly around the roundabout, the airbag would go off. Like, what? Like, what? That's the worst time for an airbag to go off. So what do they have to legally do? The manufacturing industry, they have to recall the vehicle and fix that problem because my life could be in danger. We don't have the same laws and legislation in our industry as they do in the manufacturing industry, but that is completely changing, right? They are now making all the companies liable and people in those companies liable for this stuff. So like we saw with SolarWinds, the US government, well, they created this legislation, first of all, which basically holds everyone, the company responsible for vulnerabilities in their code, and if their customers get hacked, they are responsible. It also says you need to produce S-bonds, and I'll talk a bit about those later. Now, the EU Cyber Resiliency Act goes even further than this, okay? You can't quite see it because the pixels are a bit small on here, and the writing is German as well. But essentially, it's the same kind of thing, okay? They're trying to make people liable for the code we ship. If someone dies or someone gets hacked or loses their credit card details, our company will be liable, and someone in that company could go to prison. Now, if you do not comply with this law, it's not a 10,000 euro fine, it's not a €1 million fine, it's something like 10% of global revenue of your company. You can imagine Microsoft having to pay these fines. And for example, the EU law suggests things like, if you are shipping stuff and you know there's vulnerabilities in it, you have to have a remediation process as to how you're going to fix those vulnerabilities at a later date, right? So lots of laws coming out. Australia's got some, India's got some, Japan's got some, so they're all over the place. But there are good signs of hope. Now, a lot of these foundations didn't exist not long ago, and they are here to create some security standards for the open source world so we can all abide by them and hopefully have a lot more secure applications. That project scoring thing I mentioned earlier, these are some of the methods they use essentially to determine an open source project's health, right? And these are really simple, easy ways we can improve our security as well. Code reviews. Please do code reviews. Like, this is a really simple thing that stops a lot of security vulnerabilities getting into our projects. Don't pin dependencies to specific versions, and don't, and use secure branches. The amount of people I've met that don't use secure branches, you're just like, oh no, you're just asking for bad stuff, right? All right, so I've got about 10 minutes left. Okay, I'm gonna go quick for the last bit. These are things that can help you, right? These are things that can help you improve your code, improve your security. Static analysis tools are one of them, okay? So if you don't know what a static analysis tool is, it's essentially a tool that looks at your code. It's there to find programming errors, it's there to enforce coding practices, it's there to find syntax violations and security vulnerabilities. There are lots of companies out there that do this. Not Sonatype, but Sonasource. But there is lots of companies out there that do this, so there is no excuse really to not be doing it. But there are side effects of doing this. So what else can it do? Well, it can help you create more efficient applications, right? It can improve your developers' coding skills. If your senior developers are training these tools and your junior developers are using them, they can catch up a lot quicker rather than having to keep pester your senior developers. They can make your application's code a lot easier to read, so the next generation doesn't come along and rip their hair out when they're reading your old Java code, right? It can shorten the time from development to production, and it can make your team programming heroes, right? Yeah, this is good. But there are things to consider about these tools, right? First of all, you need to know what data backs up that analysis. You need to decide what is best practices anyway. So having a tool where you can actually give it kind of rules about how you code, because not everyone codes in the same way. Yes, there are some guidelines and best practices, but every company, every team has their own slight way of coding, right? So we want to train these tools to give us the best insights for that. We don't want loads of false positives. We don't want to be negatives. We don't want to be chasing down problems that aren't actually problems. And again, like I said, we want customization. We want to customize these tools on a team-by-team basis. And small mistakes can have big impacts. The difference between these two lines of code is a vulnerability, right? That's all it is. The difference between adding an equals there and not having an equals there. And this is what static analysis tools can do. They can find these little mini mistakes that humans might not find because the code works, and then they can tell you don't do this because it'll introduce a vulnerability. There's also the second tool that will help you all, software composition analysis, SCA tools. I like to think of them as like a cake, because everyone loves cake. So we look at this cake. Imagine this is our POM file. We can see in our POM file we've got some sponge, some icing, and some food dye, right? But we don't know what's in that sponge, what's in that icing, what's in that food dye. And that's where a good software composition analysis tool will come into play, because not only will it give you a list of declared dependencies and basic information, but it'll tell you the transitive dependencies, so all the dependencies that are brought in by you doing that, vulnerability data, project scoring, license data, all these great things, right? So and there are free SCA tools out there, there's loads of free ones, but all I just want to mention with these tools is a tool is only as good as the data that backs it up, right? I did a demonstration of a very, very popular tool. It said it had no vulnerabilities in my code, whereas I use a Sonatype tool and it found loads of them. So again, they may be good at scanning stuff, but unless they've got the vulnerability data in there, they're pretty much useless, right? So software bill of materials, just to kind of finish up, SBOMs. These are essentially what the US government and the EU government is demanding we produce. And essentially what it is a record in time of every dependency that's in your application. So when you sell your software to another company or the government, they have this document and they can see, right, you've got these dependencies, they put that into an SCA tool and they can see where all your vulnerabilities are. Then they can come back to you and say, why do you have these vulnerabilities? And then you have to give a reason. But these are now mandated by the EU. So if you're selling software to any government entity in the EU, you need to have these. But they're really easy to generate, right? CycloneDX has a Maven plugin, Kubernetes has a plugin, Docker, if you're using Docker, use Docker Scout. I think that came out about 6 months ago, a year. That's amazing at creating SBOMs. So yeah, and try sign them if you can, because it's just an open document that anyone can get into. So try and sign it to make it a little bit more secure. So to summarize today, hopefully I haven't depressed you all too much, right? And this is my conclusion, okay? So the rate of open source attacks is increasing, okay? Our firewalls are pretty solid nowadays. The days of hackers hacking through firewalls are coming to an end, okay? Now they're trying to use a lot of social engineering. They're trying to pretend that they're open source committers to try and get into the open source projects to add vulnerabilities and malware into them. And this has been done very recently. I can't remember the name of it, but they pretended for 6 months they were a lovely open source committer, and they put malware in, right? So we've got to be careful because they're finding new ways to do this. They're using AI bots nowadays to try and mass attack as many people as possible just to find that one person out of all of us that's insecure. We're quite slow to react to some of these threats, as we've seen with Log4j. Still today, over the last week, 33% of the worst Java vulnerability in history, 33% of downloads are still that vulnerable version, right? And that's why we can't take it down, because we'll break 33% of everyone's builds. But and we just hope that they're not hitting that vulnerable bit of code, but we don't know what they're doing with it. But there's loads of tools to make us more secure. Automation is our friend. Our job is to automate everyone else out of a job, so let's help make our jobs a bit easier and automate them so we can focus on innovation rather than having to deal with all these things that we didn't have to deal with 25 years ago. Governments are now, we have to be careful. We need to keep up with government legislation because we do not want to be that person in our company that goes to prison for this stuff. And requiring SBOMs for the tools we use, this is very important. So if you're not producing them, just start producing them now, right? Now, we've got a free trial Sonatype have just for JPrime. Feel free to try it out. Again, no credit cards or anything needed. But what you can do with this is you can scan your applications to see if you've got any vulnerabilities in them. And then it's up to you what you do with that information afterwards, right? So if you want to know more of this, the history on AI, the history of software supply chain attacks, all this lovely good stuff, these are all the links for them. If you want to see the Log4j downloads dashboard, that's there as well. It gets updated once a week, I think. But yeah, I mean, hopefully I didn't scare you too much. Feel free to get in touch. Sonatype's available on everything. And okay, so if you want my slides, you can get them from here. Please do not hate me because I'm a back-end developer, okay? I created this, A, with the aid of an AI bot, and B, I don't do front end. I hate it. But my wife, she's a full stack developer. She saw this website and said, what the hell is that? I was like, leave me alone. I don't do front end. So I'm doing a trade-off with her. I'm going to write a blog for her because this is what I do. And she's going to fix my website, which is good. But you can get all my stuff on there, my slides, etc. So with that, thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you've enjoyed the conference.